Welcome to another episode of Questions in History. We don't rewrite, recreate, nor reimagine history. We just ask the question that tells a story. On today's episode of Question, we ask 5 questions to the Tainos / Arawak group, civilization before Columbus. Journey with us. Let's find out. Long before European ship appeared on the horizon, Jamaica was home to a thriving indigenous population known as the Tainos. Part of the wider Arawakan-speaking peoples of the Caribbean, these communities had migrated from regions of South America, particularly the Orinoco Basin, and settled across Caribbean islands, including Jamaica, Hispaniola, and Cuba over the centuries. By the time Columbus arrived in 1494, Jamaica, then called Jamaica, meaning land of wood and water, was already a well-established society. The Tainos had built an organized community, developed agricultural system, and live in relatively harmony with their environment. Their way of life was not primitive, as often portrayed, but highly adapted to the island's living condition. They cultivated crops such as cassava, maize, and sweet potato, and used advanced techniques like raised farming beds to manage soil and water. Fishing and canoe travel were central to their economy, and their craftsmanship, including pottery, weaving, and tool making from stone and shell, was exemplary. However, everything changed with the Europeans' arrival. The Spanish imposed forced labor system, introduced new diseases, and disrupt the social environmental balance that had sustained the Tainos' life. Within decades, the population collapsed dramatically. What happened to the Tainos was not just a decline, it was a near erasure. By the mid-16th century, their presence as a dominant culture in Jamaica had effectively disappeared. This is important today because it challenges the idea that Jamaica's history begins with colonization. The island had history, culture, and a people long before that. Understanding that the Taino is about reclaiming that lost foundation and recognizing that Jamaica's story did not start with Europe. So we saw that the year was 1494. Why did it happen? There was a mass migration from South America. What happened? Jamaica had a thriving society that was erased no sooner than the Spanish arrived. But why is this important? Because it proved that Jamaica had a thriving society before colonization. And did you know? Every time you consume a piece of jerk chicken, that method of cooking was created by the Tainos. But now that we have established the facts, let's get into question 2. What is the background of the society and its most important features? The Tainos were structured, organized, and deeply connected to nature. Communities were typically led by chiefs known as caciques, who governed villages and coordinated social, economic, and spiritual life. These villages were often centered around open spaces used for gatherings, ceremonies, and games. Their homes, called bohijos, were circular in structure, made from wood and thatch, designed to suit the tropical climate. Larger rectangular buildings, known as the canis, were reserved for leaders or communal use. Agriculture was the background of the Tainos' life. Cassava, in particular, was a staple crop, processed into bread that could be stored for long periods. This level of food security allowed the communities to grow and sustain themselves efficiently. Spiritually, the Tainos believed in a world filled with spirits known as zemis. These were represented through carvings and objects and played a central role in the ritual and daily life of the Tainos. Their belief system emphasized balance between humans, nature, and the spiritual world. Trade and communication between islands were also highly developed. Using large canoes, Taino people traveled across the Caribbean, exchanging goods and ideas. This created a network of interconnected communities rather than an isolated group. Importantly, Taino society was not built on a large-scale warfare or conquest. While conflicts existed, their culture emphasized cooperation, sustainability, and community. In summary, we saw that the Tainos, they had a very organized society and system of governance. They were led by a chief that called himself the cacique. They live in small huts that they call the bohijos. In the spiritual realm, they refer to their gods as zemis. But now, let's examine question 3. What escalated and the collapse of the Tainos civilization? The collapse of the Taino civilization was not caused by a single event, but by a combination of devastating factors introduced after the Europeans' arrival. The most immediate and deadly factor was disease. The Taino had no immunity to illnesses such as smallpox, measles, and influenza, which brought by the Spanish and the Europeans. These diseases spread rapidly, killing large portions of population in a very short time. On the other hand, the Spanish imposed forced labor systems, particularly the encomienda system. This required the Taino people to work in agriculture, mining, and other harsh conditions. The physical toll of this labor, combined with malnutrition, exhaustion, further weakened the population. Violence also played a role. Resistance to the Spanish control was met with punishment, including executions, destruction of communities, and widespread amputations. This created an environment of fear and instability. Another factor was the displacement. Taino communities were uprooted from their lands and forced into new settlements, disrupting their social structure and agriculture system. Over time, these pressures were compounded. Diseases reduced the population, forced labor weakened survivors, and social disruption prevented recovery. Within a few generations, the Taino population in Jamaica had been nearly wiped out. We saw diseases and the encomienda system attributed to major decline in the Tainos community. But now let's examine question 4. What were some of the key moments and decisions for the Taino people? The first major turning point was the arrival of Columbus in 1494. This marked the beginning of a sustained European contact and the introduction of new forces that would reshape the island. The establishment of the Spanish settlers was another critical moment. These settlements became the centers of control, where a system of labor and governance were imposed on the Taino population. The spread of disease represents a turning point that is less visible but more devastating. Unlike battles or political decisions, diseases worked silently, reducing populations and weakening resistance. The introduction of the encomienda system formalized the exploitation of the Taino. This system turned an entire community into labor sources, accelerating their decline and finally their erasure. The transition to African slavery marks a long-term turning point. As the Taino population declined, the Spanish began importing enslaved Africans to replace them. This shift would define the next phase of Jamaica's history. We saw that the key moment was the arrival of Columbus. The Spanish settlers, through the encomienda system, drove the Tainos to near extinction. We also saw that African slavery was introduced. But now let's examine question 5. What were the impacts and consequences? Journey. The impact of the Tainos collapse was profound and long-lasting. On a human level, it meant the loss of an entire civilization, its language, traditions, and way of life. While traces of the Taino heritage remain in Jamaican culture, much of our identity was erased. Culturally, this loss created a gap in historical memory. For many years, the Tainos were treated as a footnote in history rather than a foundational part of it. Only in recent decades has there been a renewed effort and recognized means of preserving their legacy. Economically, the decline of the Taino led directly to the expansion of African slavery. This shift transformed Jamaica into a plantation society, setting the stage for centuries of exploitation and resistance. Environmentally, the disruption of the Taino land practices altered the island's ecosystem. Their sustainable methods were replaced with extractive systems focused on profit rather than preservation. In modern Jamaica, the legacy of the Taino lives on in subtle ways. Through places, names, agricultural practices, and cultural memories. Recognizing this legacy is a part of understanding Jamaica's entire history. In summary, as it was, Jamaica simply ceased to exist. Cultural shifts, even the animals were erased after a while. Now, if you have reached this far in the video, it would have mean that you are the type of person who are interested in these type of stories and more. Please leave a like, a comment, and even share this video. For more in our episode of Questions in History.